Relax and listen to the voice. Every night, you sit there in the comfort and safety of your home, but you have no idea of what's going on outside in the darkness. Not far from your home, there's a dark and lonely place. You may not know about it, but it's there. All over the country, in small towns and cities, there are so many of these dark and lonely places. When I was a young boy, I lived in a small town. Johnny Craig lived across the street from me. I was friends with his big brother. He was just a baby then. I saw him growing up, but I never paid much attention to him. Sometimes in the evening, my mother would send me out to the local store to buy a carton of milk or a bag of sugar. And on the way to the shop, I had to pass a long, dark stretch of road. During the day, it was just a shady place lined with old, gnarled trees and vacant lots where nothing had been built and nothing was ever going to be built. I was never afraid of it by day, but at night, it was a different place. A lonesome place. A place of darkness and strangeness. A place of terror and fear. There were no houses nearby. No streetlights. It was pitch black as black could be, dark as the deepest night. The tall trees blocked out the moon and the stars, casting their long shadows across the road. Whenever you had to go that way, you walked slower and slower. It was like stepping into a dark tunnel. Behind you were the light of the houses, the sounds of cars and people walking along the sidewalk. Ahead of you, there was just a long, lonely stretch of darkness in which anything could be lurking. Anything at all. Every time I had to pass that place at night, I would dread it. I kept hoping someone would come along so I wouldn't have to walk alone, but nobody ever came. As I walked along that dark stretch of road, I would keep my eyes fixed on the trees, half expecting to see something or someone lurking there in the darkness. Perhaps it was the boogeyman. My mother had often told me about the boogeyman and how he waited in dark places for boys and girls who strayed from the path. Perhaps it was a child predator. My mother had also warned me about evil men and women who tried to lure children with the promise of candy and puppy dogs. Perhaps it was something else, something worse. Out of the corner of my eye, I would catch glimpses of misshapen figures crouching there in the pitch black, waiting for the moment when they would burst forth and pounce on me. Then, in that silent and isolated area, they would begin tearing into me and ruining me and doing unspeakable things to me, and no one would ever see me again. I'm not sure what I expected to see lurking in that lonely place at night. My imagination always got the better of me. In my mind, it was a hideous creature, somewhere between animal and man. In my mind, it had long, spindly limbs and huge, sharp claws. It had wet, slimy skin and eyes that burned like fire. I imagined it hiding in the branches of those old trees, dropping down behind me without a sound, and stalking the unwary boys and girls who passed along the dark and lonely road at night. One night, it almost got me. I was walking down the lonely road, and all of a sudden, there wasn't any light up ahead. That's when I knew that it was coming. I could just feel it waiting there in the darkness, and I started running, desperate to get away, but I could feel it behind me. I could feel it gaining on me. I could feel its breath on the back of my neck. And I ran. I ran as fast as I could. I ran until I thought my heart would burst. This thing almost had me in its clutches, but I managed to get away. When I got back to the safety of my house, I looked at myself in the mirror, and there was a long, jagged rip up the back of my shirt, as if a sharp claw had tried to grab me and just missed me by an inch. That scared me really bad, and afterwards I hated going down that lonely road more than ever. "Some night I won't come back," I warned my mother, and she just laughed at me and told me not to be silly. "There's something out there in the dark," I told her. "There's nothing there in the dark that isn't there in the light," she assured me. What do adults know about the world? Grown-ups think that they know everything. They place their trust in what they've read, but they only read what is reported in newspapers and on TV. They drive around in their cars and never have to walk anywhere at night. They don't know what goes on out there in the dark, in the wretched, lonely places where no light ever shines and the darkness hangs like a cloud on the ground and no birds ever sing. I knew they wouldn't believe me. I knew that there was nothing I could say to convince them that something or someone lived down there among the trees on that dark and lonely stretch of road. As I grew older, I gradually forgot about the lonely road. I got taller and I went to high school. I started playing football. I learned to drive and I started dating girls. The years passed by, and somehow I forgot about the thing that lurked there in the darkness. The memory of it still remained in a distant corner of my mind, but it was a memory that was locked away in childhood. The years passed by, but I never thought about the other kids who had to walk down that dark and lonely road at night. 3 days ago, Johnny Craig went missing. He lived across the street from me. I was friends with his big brother. He was just a baby then. I saw him growing up, but I never paid much attention to him. Not until he went missing. They found him in the trees on that dark and lonely stretch of road. His body was torn up and ripped and crushed, almost beyond recognition. The police and the news said that he had been mauled by some kind of animal. The moment I heard about it, I knew what happened. Johnny Craig had been murdered by the thing my childhood fears had created, the thing I had conjured up in my imagination. I'd left it on that dark and lonely stretch of road. I left it there, and it waited for some scared little boy who happened to be walking home one dark night. A little boy who couldn't run as fast as I could run now. After that, the town cut down the trees and put up streetlights. That stretch of road isn't dark and lonely anymore. The thing that lurked there is gone now. It's gone somewhere else, where the people are unsuspecting. Probably to some other small town. Maybe a small town like yours, where it'll wait again, just as it did here. Where it will wait for some other frightened little boy or girl to come along. It's only a matter of time. The old man was weak and sick. His body wouldn't last much longer. I made the old man get up and walk to the window. He looked out and saw them standing there in the snow. There were 4 hunters gathered outside the cabin. I saw them too, through his eyes. The hunters carried long guns and they were shivering with the cold. One of them walked up and banged on the door. "Hello in there!" he shouted. "Hello! We're lost and we need a place to stay for the night." I pulled the old man away from the window and made him bar the door. "We have a little money we can give you," the hunter shouted. "We just need a warm place to spend the night and a little food if you can spare it. We're freezing to death out here." I made the old man throw another log on the fire. "You don't need to be scared of us," the hunter said. "We'll leave our guns outside. We don't mean you any harm." I made the old man pick up his rifle and aim it through a slit in the cabin door. Then I giggled as I made him pull the trigger. There was a loud bang, and one of the hunters dropped in the snow. He didn't know what hit him. The others were taken off guard, and they dragged their friend's body away and took cover behind the trees. Gunshots exploded, ripping through the wooden door and breaking some of the windows. I released my hold on the old man's brain, and he collapsed in a heap on the floor. I flew up the chimney and soared above the cabin. The gunshots stopped and the hunters retreated. They would be back. I flew high above the treetops and followed them. When they stopped, I drifted down and landed in the branches of a tall tree. The hunters were below me. They were setting up a camp and building a fire. There were 3 of them now. A fat one, a skinny one, and a bearded one. The dead one lay nearby, staining the snow red with his blood. I had no use for him. The bearded one chopped wood with his axe. He looked healthy and strong. The skinny one was struggling to light the fire, while the fat one just sat there and watched. I listened as the fat one spoke to the others. He told them that they would camp there for the night, and in the morning they would attack the cabin and kill the old man. I sat there in the branches of the tree and waited for night to come. When it was dark, the men curled up around their blazing fire and tried to get some sleep. I waited until they were lying still, and then I dropped down noiselessly into the snow. I crept towards the fat man who was wrapped up in his fur coat, snoring peacefully. Slowly, I reached out and I took hold of the fat man's mind. I made him get up and walk over to where the dead man lay in the snow. I made him kneel down beside the corpse and take out his hunting knife. Then, I made him saw through the neck of his dead friend. And when he was done, I made him smear his face with blood. Then I made him pick up the severed head and carry it back to the fire. I released my hold on the fat man's mind, and that's where I left him, standing in front of the fire, smeared with blood, and holding the dead man's severed head. When he looked down and saw the head, he screamed and woke the others. They scrambled to their feet and stared in horror at the severed head the fat man was clutching. I watched it all from the safety of the trees. There were shouts and more screams as the skinny one and the bearded one grabbed their guns and blasted the fat man until he lay in a bloody heap on the snow. Now there were only 2. They sat by the fire and waited. I watched and waited too. They were waiting for dawn to arrive. Then they would attack the cabin and kill the old man. The bearded one threw more wood on the fire. He was too scared to sleep. The skinny one was weaker. He lay down and closed his eyes. I took my chance, creeping up to the skinny one and reaching into his mind. I made him take out his hunting knife. I made him slowly get to his feet. The bearded one stared at us, wondering what was going on. I made the skinny one leap across the flames and attack the bearded one. The skinny one was weak, and the bearded one was too strong for him. I knew he would lose the fight. I released his mind at just the right time and flew into the trees to watch from a safe distance. There was a fierce struggle while I was there, but in the end, the bearded one prevailed, just as I left the skinny one's body. Right at that moment, he plunged the hunting knife into his friend's chest and left the skinny one to bleed out onto the snow. The last clear perception that the skinny one would have had was seeing his friend attacking him with the knife. Now there was only one. I flew back to the cabin and slipped down the chimney. The old man lay on the floor where I left him. I took hold of his mind again, and we searched through the cabin. There was not much left in the place that I could use. In a rusty metal box, I found a pair of garden shears. The handles were rusty, but the blades were still sharp. I made the old man pick them up. I made him look out the window, and through his eyes, I saw the bearded one coming across the snow, his gun at the ready. "Come out, old man," the bearded one cried. "Come out or I'll kill you." He fired his gun and the bullet ripped through the cabin door. I made the old man shout, "Okay, I'm coming out." I made him open the garden shears and place the blades at either side of his neck. Then I made him throw open the door and walk out into the sunlight. When the bearded one saw him, he stopped in his tracks and raised his gun. "What are you up to, old man?" he demanded. The old man didn't say a word. I wouldn't let him. The bearded man cautiously approached. "Why did you have to start shooting at us?" he asked. "We didn't mean you any harm. We just needed a place to stay." The old man resisted me just for a moment, and I lost control. A thin wail escaped from his lips. "Help me," he begged. I regained control of his mind, and summoning all the strength he had in his withered arms, I made him slam the handles of the shears together. The blades snapped together, slicing off his head. It fell to the ground with a thud, and then his body crumpled and collapsed in a bloody heap next to it. My grip on his mind was broken, and I floated upwards. The bearded one was so shocked and stunned that all he could do was stare in horror at the terrible sight. I took advantage of his momentary weakness, dropping onto his shoulders and reaching into his brain to take charge. Now he was mine. After we dragged the bodies into the cabin, we feasted on the remains until I was satiated. I made the bearded man throw another log on the fire, and we sat down in the rocking chair. Together, we rocked back and forth, enjoying the heat from the roaring flames. The bearded one was strong and healthy. His body would last a long time. It was the middle of the night, and I was in the bedroom trying to relax. I changed the channel on the TV and saw that the local news was on. At the bottom of the screen, there was a breaking news alert. Murderer on the loose, hiding in the vicinity. Police warn everyone to be on alert. Suspect was last seen brandishing a blade and is to be considered armed and dangerous. I was just drifting off to sleep when I was awakened by a strange noise downstairs. It sounded like someone was in the house. At that moment, my heart began beating fast, and I broke out into a cold sweat. Straining my ears to listen, I thought I heard another noise. It was the sound of a door creaking. It wasn't my imagination. There definitely was an intruder in the house. "Oh, I have to get out of here fast," I thought. I slipped off the bed as quietly as possible, and I crept towards the window. My body was shaking with fear, and I was hoping I didn't make any noise. Just then, I heard faint footsteps making their way up the stairs. It sounded like more than one person. At any second, I felt that they would burst through the door. I had to get away. I climbed out the window and onto the garage roof, moving as fast as I could without making too much noise. At the edge of the roof, I grabbed the drain pipe and lowered myself down as carefully as I could until I dropped into the garden. As I paused, I looked up at the window that I had just escaped from, and I saw the lights go on. That was close, I thought. A chill ran down my spine as I thought about what could have happened to me if they would have caught me. I made my way to the bottom of the garden and off into the woods. Once I was safely hidden by the trees, I broke into a run. I pushed onwards, stumbling through the darkness, moving through the undergrowth, until I came to another housing estate. They didn't get me that time, I thought, as I clutched my knife and headed towards the entryway of another house. When I was younger, there was a ruined building at the bottom of our street. All of the kids in the area kept well away from it because the rumor was that it was haunted. The concrete walls of the old two-story building were cracked and crumbling. The windows were broken and shards of glass lay all over the floor inside. One evening, as a test of courage, my best friend and I decided to explore the creepy old place. We climbed in through a window at the back of the building. The whole place was dirty, and there was a layer of dried mud on a wooden floor. As we dusted ourselves off, we looked up and we were shocked to see that someone had written the words, "I am dead," on the wall near the ceiling. Probably just some teenagers trying to scare us kids, I said. Yeah, probably, replied my friend nervously. We explored more of the rooms on the ground floor. In a room that appeared to have once been a kitchen of sorts, we found more writing on the wall. It read, "I am in a room upstairs." We walked up the creaking stairs to the second floor. I led the way, and my friend followed close behind. I wasn't scared, but he was beginning to get a little jittery. When we came to the top of the stairs, we turned left and walked cautiously down the narrow hallway. At the end of the hallway was a closed door with some more ominous writing on it. What we saw written on that door read, "You will find me in this room." By now, my friend was shaking with fear. I was quite creeped out too, but I didn't want to show it. He told me he didn't want to go any further, but I insisted, telling him that there was obviously nothing to be afraid of. I turned the handle, and the door creaked open. We stepped into the room and found it empty. There were 2 closed doors on either side, and there was more creepy writing on the wall. This read, "My head is on the left, and my body is on the right." As soon as my friend saw this, he completely lost his nerve. He gave a yelp and turned to run away. I caught a hold of his arm, but he shook me off and fled out through the open door. I heard his footsteps disappearing off down the hallway. I held my ground. I was determined to be brave and overcome my fear. Mustering all of my courage, I opened the door on the right and walked inside. I walked to the other side of the room, and on the wall, written in tiny letters, were the words, "My body is underneath." I looked down at the floor. I was standing on some more writing on the floorboards. I stepped back and saw the words, "My head is coming from the room behind you. Turn around." I heard the door behind me creaking, and I quickly turned. There was a shadow moving behind the door. Suddenly, something rolled into the room and came to a rest against the wall. It was my friend's severed head. His dead, sightless eyes seemed to stare at me. Screaming in horror, I flung myself out through the open window and fell 2 stories to the ground. I landed on my side, breaking my arm. In horrible pain, I ran home, screaming, trying to get anyone's attention, crying and yelling for my parents. Once I arrived at home, I burst through the door, still screaming, and told my parents what had happened. The police were called, and they searched the old ruined building. At first, they didn't find anything. There wasn't even any writing on the wall. They said that they combed the house from top to bottom, but they didn't find any traces of my friend. At some point during their investigation, they saw some loose floorboards, and they chose to pry them up. My friend's body was lying underneath, and they never found his head. One day, a young married couple went hiking in the mountains. As the sun began to set, they realized that they were quite lost. The wife was getting worried, but her husband tried to calm her down and assured her that they would eventually find their way back to their car. However, after walking for hours, they still had no idea where they were. It was growing dark, and the man and wife were getting desperate. They didn't have a map or a compass with them, and all of the trees looked the same. Just when they were about to give up hope, they came across an old cabin in a clearing. The cabin looked as if it had seen better days. It was dilapidated and seemed like it hadn't been used in a long time. Some of the windows were cracked and broken, and a lot of the tiles had fallen off of the roof. The husband walked up and knocked on the front door, but there was no response. When he jiggled the handle, he heard a crack, and the door slowly creaked open. After a moment, the couple went inside, and they found that the innards of the house were in a bad state of disrepair. There was very little furniture, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. As the couple cautiously looked around, they noticed a strange atmosphere and a peculiar musty smell. The walls were covered from floor to ceiling with graffiti. Written in red paint, they saw the word death repeated over and over again. The man and the woman were slightly unnerved, and with a shaking hand, the husband reached out to touch the wall. He was horrified to find that the paint was not even dry yet. The couple were very frightened, but they had nowhere else to go. They knew that the mountain was dangerous at night, and there were lots of wild animals prowling in the woods. Despite the creepy writing on the walls and the freshness of the paint, they decided to stay the night. Going upstairs, they found a moth-eaten mattress that was covered in stains. The husband and wife wrapped themselves in an old piece of carpet to keep warm and tried to make themselves as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. They lay down together on a mattress and eventually, somehow, managed to fall asleep. Sometime after midnight, the couple were awakened by a strange rustling noise. It sounded like someone, or something, was moving around outside the shack. "Did you hear that?" asked the wife. "I think there's somebody out there." Her husband listened for a while, but he didn't hear anything. He got out of bed and walked over to the window. It was too dark outside to see anything. Opening the window, he stuck his head out. "Who's there?" he called nervously. There was no answer. He was about to go back to bed when his wife said, "Maybe it's someone who can't speak." The husband pondered on what she had said. Then he returned to the window, stuck his head out and said, "Is there anybody out there? Clap once for yes, and twice for no." He strained his ears to listen. The stars twinkled in the night sky, and the crickets were chirping loudly. All of a sudden, he heard a loud clap, The man turned to his wife and said in surprise, You were right. There's someone out there." He leaned out the window and his eyes scanned the darkness. He couldn't make out anything in the pitch black. Are you the owner of this cabin?" he asked. "Clap, clap." "Are you a man?" "Clap, clap." "You're a woman then?" "Clap, clap." "Are you human?" "Clap, clap." A chill ran down his spine. He swallowed hard and croaked. "Did you come here alone?" "Clap, clap." "How many are with you? Clap once for everyone who's out there." Clap, 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 clap. On the morning of her birthday, Lucy's mother woke her up and told her a package had arrived in the mail, and it was addressed to her. The girl hurriedly unwrapped the gift and was horrified at what she found inside. It was the most disgusting old doll that she had ever seen. It was completely bald, and its skin was cracked and caked in dirt. The worst thing of all was its teeth. They were long, pointy, sharp, and beastly. They looked like an animal's fangs. With a shiver, she took the doll and threw it in a corner. Her mother scolded her, telling her that someone had gone to a lot of trouble to send her this antique doll. Her mother told her she had better appreciate it. Lucy tried to protest, but her mother would not listen. She forced the young girl to keep the doll. So to put her mind at rest, Lucy stuffed the antique doll into the little cupboard under the stairs, behind a pile of shoes, where she wouldn't have to look at the ugly, evil-feeling little thing. It was not until a few nights later, when Lucy was lying in bed, that she heard a noise. A shuffling sound, which went on for about 5 minutes, and then a brief dragging noise, and finally a scuttling like light footsteps walking very fast. By now, Lucy was shaking in her bed with fear, unable to move. Then she thought she heard a faint, raspy voice whispering quietly from downstairs. Lucy always slept with the door open and the landing light on, as she was a little scared of the dark. She heard the voice say, "Lucy, I'm on the first step," and then loud scrambling again, as whatever was speaking apparently turned tail and returned to its place of hiding. Lucy was so scared that she didn't sleep a wink that night, but laid in fear until the break of dawn, when her mother got her up for school. Lucy tried to explain to her mother what had happened the night before, but was so tired that when her mother passed it off as just a dream, she began to believe that that might have been the case. Of course, it wasn't. Lucy begged her parents to let her throw the antique doll in the garbage, but they insisted that it was a present and she had to keep it. So Lucy reluctantly went back to bed, telling herself that it had only been a dream. She checked the cupboard under the stairs, but the doll was exactly where Lucy had left her. That night, Lucy fought sleep, but she eventually drifted off, even though she had fought as hard as she could. Presently, the deep, disembodied voice woke Lucy again. She wondered if she could only hear it in her head. "Lucy, I'm on the 4th step," it said. Then came the scuffling noise, and the voice didn't reoccur that night. Lucy was crying by this point, and again she didn't sleep at all. At school, Lucy told her friends about the doll, and of course they just laughed at her. Lucy could only think that if the doll was climbing 4 steps at a time, there was only one more night to go. That night, Lucy decided to shut her bedroom door. When her mother turned her light out, she asked why Lucy was no longer scared of the dark. Lucy replied that she was, and could she leave her light on instead of the hall light? But her mother pointed out that the bedroom light was so bright it would keep her awake, and she told her no. Therefore, Lucy agreed just to sleep without a light. She opened the bedroom curtains instead, hoping to light the room a little bit anyway. Just as she began to doze, she heard a noise, and then the voice came, very clear this time. "Lucy, I'm on the top step." In the darkness of her bedroom, Lucy heard a click and trembled with fear. She wasn't sure, but she thought that she could see her bedroom door opening very, very slowly. The next morning, Lucy's parents found her body at the bottom of the stairs. They guessed that she had been on her way to the toilet during the night, and in the darkness had slipped and fallen down the stairs, breaking her back and her neck. Lucy's antique doll was right beside her body and was later buried with Lucy. Everyone spoke of what a tragedy it had been. "She loved that doll," said her mother, "and now they can be together forever." A few years ago, there was a young man named Ben who went to university. He didn't have enough money to live in the campus accommodation, so he had to rent an apartment on his own in the city. After he had been living there alone for a while, he began to notice some strange things happening. Often, when he came back from college, the curtains in his bedroom would be drawn, when he distinctly remembered having left them open when he left that morning. At other times, some of his belongings seemed to have been moved, and other possessions were nowhere to be found. These strange occurrences started to creep Ben out, so the young man decided to talk to his friends, Trisha and Alex, about the situation. They met him at a local diner, and over coffee, he told them all about the strange things that he had noticed. "Maybe I'm just being paranoid," said Ben, "but I just have a sneaking suspicion that someone is breaking into my apartment during the day while I'm at university, and what?" interrupted Alex. "Rearranging your curtains and moving your stuff around? Who in their right mind would bother doing that?" "It sounds crazy, but you might have a stalker," said Trisha. "It's a possibility, and if it's true, I think the best thing to do is to contact the police." "What can the police do?" asked Alex. "They're not going to spend their time keeping your apartment under surveillance. Besides, there's no damage to any of your things. There's no sign of a break-in. So in short, there's no evidence." "So what options do I have then?" pleaded Ben. "I can't just sit around and do nothing." "I know how you can put your mind at ease," said Trisha. "It's easy. Just get a security camera, set it up somewhere in your apartment, and leave it running when you go to school. If you really do have a stalker, you can show the tape to the police as evidence." "You know, that's a great idea," said Ben. "And if you're really just paranoid and crazy, then you can show the tape to your psychiatrist," joked Alex. That night, after leaving school, Ben walked across town to his local electronics shop, purchased a video camera, and brought it home. The very next morning, he hid it discreetly under some folders on his desk. Before he went to school, he pressed the record button and left it running. During the day, while he sat taking notes and lectures, the young man forgot all about the video camera. It was not until he arrived home and went into his bedroom that he remembered the plan he had set. Taking the video camera out of its hiding place, he pressed the stop button. Then he took out his mobile phone and called his friend. "Hey Trisha," he said. "I just got home. I'm gonna watch the video." "Cool," said Trisha. "Don't hang up. Tell me if you see anything." He pressed play and watched the recording on the video camera's tiny screen. He saw himself leaving for university in the morning and closing the bedroom door. Then there was nothing. He pressed fast forward and scanned through the video. The room remained empty. Still nothing," he said. "I can wait," replied Trisha. "Anyway, there's nothing worth watching on TV at the moment." "Oh my God!" cried Ben as he pressed play on the camera. What? Trisha begged excitedly. "The door's opening," said Brian. "It's a woman." "Oh, what's she doing?" asked Trisha. She's just standing there, closing the door, walking around. Oh my gosh, so weird. What does she look like?" "Trisha, I can't see her face. She's got long, stringy black hair, a tattered dress." "Do you know her? Have you seen her before?" "No, I don't recognize her at all. She's carrying a knife, a big kitchen knife. She's going through my trash. Now she's picking up my clothes and sniffing them. Ugh, gross. What is wrong with her?" "Okay, she's going over to the closet. She opened the door and she went into my closet." "Okay, well fast forward and see if she does anything else." Ben scanned through the video for a while, but the room remained empty. "You know what this means," said Ben. "I have the evidence now. I can go to the police, and they'll have to take me seriously." "Oh, I know," said Trisha. "They'll absolutely have to. Alex is totally gonna freak out when he sees this." "Oh, no doubt. He didn't believe you, but I did," said Trisha. "I know. You're a good friend. Thank you." "Oh my God." What? Said Trisha. Ben had pressed play again. "The door's opening again," said Ben. "Who is it?" asked Trisha. "Oh, it's okay. It's just me coming home from school." He watched himself on the screen as he walked over to the desk, picked up the camera, and powered it off. "Let's go to the police now," said Trisha. "I'll go with you. We can show them the tape." "Okay, that sounds good. I'll meet you at the diner in 15 minutes, said Ben as he grabbed the video camera. "Okay, wait a minute," said Trisha. "You said she got into the closet. Did she ever leave, Ben? Did you see her get out of the closet?" A chill ran down Ben's spine. Behind him, he heard the closet door creak open. The phone went dead. Trisha tried to call Ben again, but there was no answer. Later that evening, the police found the body of an 18-year-old college student lying in a pool of blood. He'd been stabbed 21 times. A video camera was clutched in his cold, dead hands. When the police examined the camera, they discovered that the memory card was missing. No trace of the woman was ever found. For all anyone knows, right now, she could be hiding in your closet. The policeman sat on the sofa with his pen and notebook in his hands. The old lady came in with a cup of tea and set it down on the table in front of him. "Before you take me down to the station, perhaps I should tell you why I did it, officer," she said. "The truth is, it was mostly for the company. It gets very lonely when you're an old lady, and young people never seem to want to spend any time with you. I enjoy just sitting and talking." The policeman stared at her impassively. "Miss Ordway was the very first," she said, as she sat down in her comfy armchair. "I remember it like it was yesterday. She came to my door selling beauty products. I invited her inside, and I made her a cup of tea. I went into the kitchen and fetched my axe, and then, when she least suspected it, I crept up behind her and chopped off her head. The next one was Mr. Bilgeman. He was a plumber, and he came to fix my leaky pipes. While he was taking a break from his work, I made him a cup of tea, and then I took my axe out from behind the sofa and chopped off his head too. The third one was the paper boy, little Jimmy Watkins. I told him to come inside while I looked for my purse. He didn't drink tea, so I gave him a plate of cookies. Children can't resist cookies. While he was munching away on the cookies, I began chopping with my axe, and his head came off as well. I stuffed all the heads and placed them on my mantelpiece. I talked to them day and night. I carry on conversations with them. It helps with the loneliness. The only problem was what to do with the bodies. I couldn't stuff them all. It would have been too much work. So I came up with an ingenious solution. What did I do? Well, it was simple. I stuffed one body and used it for all the heads. When I was tired of talking to one of them, I would take off the head, put it back on the mantelpiece, and put another head on the body. Isn't that clever? The policeman didn't answer. "Well, I'm getting a little bored with our conversation, officer," the old lady said with a sigh. She stood up, took off the policeman's head, and put it back on the mantelpiece. Then she took down the saleswoman's head and placed it on the body. "Oh, good afternoon, Mrs. Ordway," she said. "It's nice to see you again. Tell me, how have you been?" I had a best friend. His name was Billy. We went to school together and hung out all the time. And then one day, Billy stopped coming to school. I didn't see him for weeks. The kids at the school were spreading rumors that he had suffered a nervous breakdown. One evening when my parents were out, there was a knock at the door. When I answered it, Billy was standing there, but he was acting very strangely. His eyes were tired and bloodshot, and he looked like he was very nervous. He kept looking around and glancing over his shoulder. "I need to talk to you," he said. I invited him inside and closed the door. He sat down on the couch, but he couldn't relax. Something was really bothering him. He was twitching and his leg was shaking. "Are you okay?" I asked. "My parents think I'm crazy," he said. "Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Even I thought I was crazy for a while." "Well, are you crazy?" I asked. Billy let out a humorless chuckle. "Look out the window," he said. "Why?" "Just do me a favor. Look out the window and tell me what you see." I decided to humor him, so I opened the curtains and peered out. "What do you see?" he asked. "Well, I see some houses, some cars, some streetlights, Exactly, he said. And do you notice anything strange? No. No, I don't. You see those streetlights? He asked. They're supposed to be on, but they're not. They're all off. How could every light on the street be off? Who do you think did that? Oh, I don't know, I said. Who did it? Billy lowered his voice and whispered, "The Thin Man." What are you talking about? I said in astonishment. I heard rumors about him before, Billy said, but I thought it was just an urban legend. It's not. The Thin Man is real. He hates the streetlights. He looks just like a normal man at first, but when he unfolds himself, he's really tall and really thin, just like a streetlight, and he's dressed in all gray, just like a streetlight. He hides behind them, and when it starts to get dark outside and the streetlights aren't on, you wouldn't even know that he was there. How do you know all of this, Billy? I asked. Because I've seen him. When have you seen him? A few weeks ago, I was kicking a football around in the park, and I accidentally kicked it into the bushes. Well, I went in to get it, and that's when I saw him. He seemed just like an ordinary man, standing in the street. He was looking up and down the block, and then, when he thought that, I guess when he thought that nobody was watching, he just sort of, unfolded himself. He turned into something tall and thin, and then he hid behind the streetlight. And all of a sudden, I heard a click, and the light went out. And he just sort of slid to the next streetlight, and I heard another click, and then that one went out too. He did it all down the block. He did his click and slide, and click and slide, and click and slide, until all of the lights were out. And that's when he noticed me. All of a sudden our eyes met, and I knew that he had seen me, and he knew that I'd seen him. I just started running, and I didn't look back. And when I got home, I locked all the doors. For a long time after that, I was afraid to leave the house. Then I realized that it was only dangerous at night. It's usually safe during the day. He only comes out at night. I think that he hates being seen. Nobody believes me. My parents took me to a psychiatrist, and she didn't believe me either. Do you believe me? Please, tell me that you believe me. Sure, Billy, I said, trying to humor him. Calm down. I believe you. I believe you. Oh, no, you don't, he said, sounding disappointed. Anyway, even if you don't believe me, I thought I'd better warn you. After all, you are my best friend. And with that, Billy got up with his head down and said goodbye. At the front door, he looked all around to make sure it was safe, and then he took off running. I watched him until he was out of sight, and then I went back inside. I felt really sad. I felt like my best friend must have lost his mind. And that was until the next morning when I heard the news that the police had found Billy. He had been folded. There was no blood and no guts, but every bone in his body had been broken. Billy had been folded up into a tiny little bundle. The police didn't even know what they'd found at first, until they picked him up and they saw his flattened face. Billy's mother had to go down to the police station and identify his body. When they brought her into the room to show her his remains, she fainted. He was just a tiny little bundle of flesh and crunched up bone and clothes and hair. He'd been folded. Ever since I heard the news, I'd been on edge. I can't stop thinking about it, thinking about the crazy things that Billy told me. Suddenly they don't seem so crazy. I haven't been able to sleep. I'm tired. My eyes are bloodshot. I'm nervous all the time, and I always find myself looking over my shoulder. And this morning, when I left for school, I counted the street lamps on my road. And when I came home this evening, I counted them again. There was one too many. I'm a single father. My wife left me years ago for another man. Since then, I've been raising our 2 sons alone. Eric is 8, and Andrew is just 6. The other day, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. I saw Andrew in the backyard, and he was playing football with someone, but I couldn't see who it was. All I could see was Andrew kicking the ball, and someone else was kicking it back to him. I just assumed it was his brother Eric. I was startled when I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and Eric came in and sat down at the table. I immediately began to wonder who Andrew might be playing with. My children know that they're not allowed to invite anyone into the house without my permission, so I called Andrew to come in for dinner. Feeling a little annoyed, I asked him, "What were you doing?" "Well, I was playing with my friend," he replied. "What friend?" I asked. "You know you're not allowed to invite anyone over without permission." "No, Dad, my friend from the tree," he said. "He likes to fly." Irritated and feeling like I was being lied to, I told him to stop making things up. Andrew insisted it was true. He said that his friend didn't want to come inside the house because he might scare me. I realized he must have an imaginary friend, and somehow I forgot about the football being kicked back to him and began asking questions. "Okay, what's your friend's name?" "It's Balthazar, Dad." "And where does he live?" "I don't know," he replied, "but he always comes to play." "What kind of games do you play?" "All sorts of games. He always comes down from the tree, and he asks me if I want to fly like him." At that moment, I felt a shiver run through my body. I heard the sound of laughter coming from the backyard. I got up quickly to see who it was, but when I peered out the window, I couldn't see anyone. "It's him, Dad," said Andrew. "He's waiting for me to come back out and play." For some reason, this just unnerved me. I suppose I wanted to prove to myself that this Balthazar wasn't real, so I told Andrew to invite him in to have dinner with us. Without saying anything, Andrew got up and walked over to the door. He beckoned with his hand and then came back and sat down at the table again. I looked at the doorway, half expecting to see someone come in, but there was no one. "Stop staring at the door, Dad," Andrew said. "He's already here." I told Andrew to stop playing around and started to scold him. Eric began to chuckle. And then the chuckling got louder and turned into cackling laughter, and it sent a chill down my spine. I scolded Eric, but he wouldn't stop. His cackling just grew louder and louder. It began to sound evil and malicious. "I told you not to play with Eric," said Andrew. Eric could not stop laughing, and Andrew just sat there calmly eating his dinner. I shouted at Eric and I told him to stop playing around. All of a sudden, he stopped laughing and grabbed my hand. And then, in a deep, rasping voice, he said, "You also want to fly?" Then he burst into that ghoulish laughter again. Even thinking about it now, I can't tell you how disturbed I was by his behavior. It caused me to leave the room and I went upstairs to calm down. His laughter and that voice sent chills down my spine. It was so unsettling, and I could still hear it coming from the kitchen. After a while, everything was silent. When I went downstairs again, the boys were back to normal, playing video games on the TV. The next day, I left work early. By the time the children returned home from school, I was already preparing dinner. Everything seemed normal. I told the boys to wash their hands, and when they sat down at the table, I served their meals. Everything seemed normal until I asked my sons about what had happened the day before. Eric's face was completely blank. He didn't seem to remember anything about it. "Balthazar was eating with us," Andrew said casually. "But Andrew, Balthazar never came to sit at the table," I said. "He did, Dad," Andrew insisted. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Why didn't I see him then?" "Dad, you told me to invite Balthazar to come to dinner, and I did what you said." "What do you and Balthazar do together?" I asked. "Well, when Balthazar comes to play with me, he flies down from the tree. We play games, but sometimes he gets angry because he doesn't like losing, and that's when he lets me fly, and he just stays on the ground playing alone." When I heard those words, my skin began to crawl. Then I asked Andrew about what happened yesterday when his brother started laughing. "Balthazar came into the house yesterday, but he was angry because he doesn't like Eric, so he let Eric fly, and he ate with us." "Eric, do you remember flying?" I asked. "No, Dad," Eric replied. "I just remember I was eating and you were sitting at the table, and then I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, you were upstairs in your room." I felt sick to my stomach. I was finally beginning to understand what he was saying. This Balthazar had possessed my son Eric right in front of my eyes. "Andrew, who is this Balthazar?" I demanded. "Dad, remember those 2 children who were burned up in the fire?" When he said that, the blood ran cold in my veins. "Yes," I answered hoarsely. Years ago, in a house not far from where we lived, a whole family had been killed. The house had been set on fire, and it burned to the ground. All they found afterwards were charred remains, but that all happened a long time ago, before my sons were even born. There's no way that they could possibly know about it. "Well, the boy is Balthazar," Andrew said. "Who told you about that fire?" I demanded. "Was it the other children in school?" "No, it was Balthazar," Andrew said. "Sometimes at night, he comes down from the trees and just stands there very still, watching you while you sleep. I keep telling him you don't like being stared at, but he doesn't listen." My stomach was churning, and I felt like I was going to throw up. "What did he tell you about the fire?" I managed to croak out. "He told me one night he heard noises in his house, and they woke him up. And when he peeked out the door of his room, he saw his dad lying dead on the ground. Then he heard a scream and he saw 2 men cutting his mom's neck. He said that he and his sister ran and hid in a closet, and they were really scared. After a while, they didn't hear anything outside, but they were still afraid to leave. And then they smelled smoke, and they couldn't see, and it started getting really hot. And the last thing he remembered before he fell asleep was that his whole body was on fire." After hearing this, I was speechless. I've never been so scared in my life, and the worst thing is, my children don't know what's happening. Since then, I've barely been able to sleep a wink. I don't know what to do. I need help. My children are being possessed. And how can I sleep knowing that a dead child is watching me intently at my bedside? A 21-year-old man went on holiday to the Bahamas. When he arrived at his hotel, he found everything to his liking. The weather was perfect, the beach was immaculate, and the hotel was high class and the atmosphere was exciting. That night, he put on his most fragrant aftershave, donned an expensive shirt, and went down to the hotel bar for a drink. He spotted a beautiful woman in a revealing red dress standing at the bar. She was incredibly attractive, with long dark hair, deep brown eyes, tanned skin, full lips, round hips, and an ample bosom. In his opinion, she had it all. The man stared at her and was enchanted by her eyes, so much so that he instantly fell in love. Gathering his courage, he sauntered over to the woman and stood next to her at the bar. When the opportunity arose, he leaned in and asked if he could buy her a drink. Imagine his disappointment when she refused and dismissed him with a wave of her hand. It made him crazy. He felt rejected and became very annoyed and angry. To him, it felt as if she had stabbed him straight through the heart. He was so disappointed that he returned to his hotel room, hanging his head in shame. The next night, he was back at the bar and he spotted the woman again. He figured that he had nothing to lose, so he thought he would give it a second chance. "Hey, my name's Josh," he said, flashing a smile. "Why would I care what your name is?" she asked. "Well, I thought maybe we could get to know each other a little better," he said, filled with hope. "I would rather chew my own leg off," was the withering reply that she gave him. Once again, the young man found himself making his way back to his room, feeling humiliated. The next day, as he was exploring the city, he walked past an old woman who was selling her wares by the side of the street. He saw that she had a sign that read, "Spellcasting and Black Magic." Stopping at her cart, he asked her if she had something that could make a woman fall head over heels in love with a man. The woman smiled and told him that she had the perfect solution for him. She held up a small bottle with a heart emblazoned on the glass. It contained a red, syrup-like liquid. She told him that it was a love potion. The man eagerly took the bottle and paid her for it. As he was leaving, the old woman warned him to only put a single drop into the drink of the woman he intended to use it on. Otherwise, she said, he might regret it. That night, the man strode into the bar and sat down next to the young woman. He began to speak with her, gently. She turned her head as if to avoid it, and when she did that, he took the opportunity to pour the love potion into her glass. As Josh was rushing, and also slightly worried that the potion may be ineffective, he poured about half of the bottle into her drink. 20 minutes later, the woman turned to him and smiled. Her eyes glittered and her pupils dilated. Before he could say a word, she threw herself on him and began to kiss him passionately. The man couldn't believe his luck. That love potion actually worked. The two of them spent the entire night in romantic embraces, kissing and cuddling like they were newlyweds. When the morning came, the woman wanted to surprise Josh. She decided to prepare a lovely breakfast and went looking for cream cheese and croissants. Unfortunately, the moment she set foot outside the hotel, she was hit and killed by a moving car. The car had run over her head and neck. After the initial impact, the tires of the car screeched to a halt and came to rest on the woman's torso, ensuring that she was dead. After hearing the news, Josh spent the entire day crying. As night fell, and he remembered the single night that they had spent together, he found himself unable to sleep. As he lay in bed, tossing and turning, he suddenly sensed a presence in the room. Turning over in bed, he was horrified to see the ghostly figure of the woman in red crouching down by the door. When she raised her head up to look at him, he saw that her neck was twisted at an unnatural angle, and the skin on her face had been ripped off, revealing the bone underneath. Before Josh had a chance to react, the ghost jumped at him and began kissing him passionately, mashing her bony teeth and mutilated lips against his mouth. He screamed and screamed, but she didn't let go until morning, and every night she returned and did the same thing until the end of his life. One dark night, a 15-year-old girl named Lydia was walking home from her friend's house. She turned down a narrow street to take a shortcut and was startled by the sight of an old man standing in her path. When she stopped, the old man turned to her and in a hoarse voice said, "Show me the way." His face was disgusting, his skin covered in scars and boils. His hair was stringy and unkempt, and his eyes were bulging horribly, almost popping out of their sockets. Lydia was terrified. She found herself alone in a dark and narrow alleyway with a strange and disturbing man. Her heart began pounding, and it took her a few seconds to catch her breath. "Show me the way," the old man demanded. Not knowing what to do or say, Lydia replied, Okay, where are you going?" When the old man told her the address he was searching for, a chill ran down her spine, for the address was her home address. Thinking as quickly as she could and trying to react as normally as possible, Lydia replied, "Oh, I don't know where that is," and she curtly pushed past the old man and began jogging down the alleyway. As she glanced back, she could see the old man standing there, watching her flee. Lydia was so freaked out by the incident that once she made it around the corner, the slow-paced jog turned into an absolute sprint and didn't stop until she got back to her home. Looking around nervously, she saw no one, and though she was panting, she felt safe and breathed a sigh of relief. She took out her keys and put them into the lock. She looked up and down the street one more time to make sure that the old man hadn't followed her. The street was completely empty. As she turned the key, she heard the click of the lock, and she pushed the door open. Once she had fully opened the door, from inside the darkness of her house, she heard a hoarse voice say, "Thank you." There was a 21-year-old man who loved to travel to exotic countries. After a while, he grew bored of the usual holiday destinations and wanted a trip that would be more exciting. His plan was to backpack around Southeast Asia for a few months. He thought that it would be a great experience to feel the freedom of traveling through remote areas, crossing mountains, and meeting random people along the way. His first destination was China. When his plane landed in Beijing, the only luggage he had was the small backpack he was carrying. However, the young man didn't want to stay for very long in the hustle and bustle of a huge Chinese city. He was eager to explore the hills and the valleys of the vast country. The young man had an idea that he was sure would turn his little backpacking trip into a much more interesting adventure. He decided to randomly hop on a bus without having any idea where it was going. Not knowing the destination made it feel like he was taking a mystery tour around China. Every time that the bus reached the end of the line, he would hop off and randomly catch another bus, never knowing or caring where it would take him. After a few weeks, he found himself traveling around some of the most remote regions in China. He found himself in an area that tourists seldom visited. The man was delighted to be passing through all the tiny villages and having the opportunity to see how the rural Chinese people really lived. On another day, he found himself traveling on yet another bus, passing through yet another remote area. When they set out, the bus was empty, but after about 6 stops, a large crowd of people got on, and the bus became filled to capacity. After a while, the young man noticed that the other passengers kept looking at him strangely. He also thought that it was odd that they chose to stand instead of sitting down in the vacant seat next to him. At the next stop, a beautiful Chinese woman boarded the bus. She looked around, and when she saw the young backpacker, her eyes suddenly grew wide with shock. She hurried down the aisle and sat down beside him, which in turn surprised and shocked him a bit too. Suddenly the woman nudged him and whispered, "Do you know where you're going?" "I have no idea," replied the man with a smile. "I'm just backpacking around the country. I got on this bus without even looking at the destination." "Well, I must warn you that you're in grave danger," she said. "Why?" asked the man. "The next stop is the end of the line," said the woman. "It's a small village, and it has an awful reputation. They say that the people who live there prey on Western tourists who become lost. They say that they're cannibals." The man couldn't believe what she was saying. At first, he thought she must be joking, but when he looked at her face, he couldn't even detect the smallest hint of a smile. "Surely you can't be serious," he said. "What I'm telling you is the truth," replied the woman. "If you're wise, you will take heed of what I tell you. Everyone in this area has heard the horrible tales of what goes on in this village. In my language, it is called the man-eating village." As he thought that this had to be some kind of crazy joke, but couldn't sense that the woman was pulling his leg, he felt confused and shocked to his very core. He found himself at a loss for words. "If you don't believe me, just look around," she continued. "Almost all of the passengers on this bus are from that village." The young man looked up and realized that all of the other passengers were staring at him hungrily and licking their lips. "When the bus reaches the end of the line, you'll be in their territory," said the woman. "No one will be able to save you. They will take a hold of you, and they will eat you alive." At this, the young backpacker broke out into a cold sweat. As he looked up, he could see the murderous look in the eyes of the strange Chinese villagers. He realized that he had to escape before the bus reached the village. Just then, he felt the bus begin to slow down as it ascended a steep mountain road. "This is our last chance," said the woman. "Let's go." She grabbed him by the hand, and they ran down the aisle to the back of the bus before the other passengers had a chance to react. The woman pulled the handle of the emergency exit, and they jumped out. The young man was being pulled behind her, and he followed her closely, leaping through the narrow opening. They both crashed down onto the dirt road and rolled over. As the young man picked himself up, he saw the woman jump across the ditch and run off into the woods. He followed her, running as fast as he could. The two escaped into the mountains as they heard the angry yelling of the other passengers echoing behind them. The man fled for his life, scrambling up the steep mountain slope, desperate to evade what he thought were the hungry cannibals who were pursuing him. Eventually, the voices began to fade into the distance. He assumed that the villagers must have given up the chase and returned to the bus. The man was exhausted, but he was overjoyed that he had managed to escape their ravenous clutches. As he lay panting on a large rock, trying to catch his breath, he heard footsteps, and like a scared animal, he looked up. He saw the woman walking towards him with a smile on her face and laughing softly to herself. "Wow, we barely made it out of there," she said. "Now I can eat alone." I loved my grandma. She used to bake me cookies, the kind with the chocolate chips. When Mom said I couldn't have them anymore, Grandma still baked them and let me eat them before Mom came home from work. At night, Grandma used to read me bedtime stories. Not those stupid fairy tale ones. Grandma told me ghost stories. They were gory and grotesque, and most of all, exciting. We would stay up at night and talk for hours and hours. It's weird, but she was like my best friend. Mom was always yelling at me and complaining about every little thing I did, and Grandma always stuck up for me. Whenever Mom said I had to do my homework, Grandma would always help me, and sometimes she would even do my homework for me. Even though Grandma didn't have a job, she was always buying me presents. All Mom and Dad did was complain about how we didn't have any money and how everything cost so much and how I needed to behave myself. Grandma never said a bad word about me. But what I liked best about Grandma was that she never punished me like Mom and Dad did. She let me do whatever I wanted to do. Sometimes Mom and Dad would lock me in my room, but when they went out, Grandma would come up and let me out. Those are some of the reasons why I loved my grandma more than everyone else in the whole wide world. Every day I would run home from school to see what kind of cookies or treats that Grandma had gotten for me. And then one day, all of that changed. That was the day I found out there wouldn't be any more cookies, and there wouldn't be any more ghost stories, and that there wouldn't be any more fun. Because when I got home that day and opened the front door, Grandma was lying in a heap at the bottom of the stairs. She looked kind of like a broken doll. Her arms and legs were sticking out at odd angles, and her head was twisted all the way around. Her glasses were broken, and she just stared up at me, but it was like she wasn't even really seeing me. I tried to shake her to see if she would get up, but she was as stiff as a log, and her body was as cold as ice. No matter how much I shook her and shook her, she just wouldn't get up. I knew it was bad when I couldn't hear her heart beating. I listened harder and harder, but I still couldn't hear anything. I don't remember much after that. I just sat there and waited for Mom and Dad to get home. Once they showed up, they started crying and they called the police. A little while later, some men came to take Grandma away. I heard them saying that she must have fallen down the stairs. After Grandma went away, things started to get bad. Mom was crying all the time, and Dad started drinking. At night, I heard them yelling at each other. Dad was complaining about Grandma. He said that she spoiled me. I never did like Dad. He was always mean, and the drinking just seemed to make him meaner. Sometimes when I did something bad, Dad would hit me and send me to my room. I didn't like that at all. I started wishing that Grandma was there so things could go back to how they were before. Mom didn't talk very much anymore, and she stopped going to work. Sometimes she would take me out for a drive, and on the way home, we usually went to visit Grandma in the cemetery. One night, Dad stayed out late, and Mom was in bed crying. I snuck out of the house and went down to the cemetery. I took my bucket and my shovel with me and my little wagon. Mom had taken me to visit Grandma so many times that it was easy for me to find her grave. I started digging and digging. It was a really hard job, but I didn't care. I just wiped the sweat off my brow and I just kept digging. It took a long time to dig up the coffin, and when I finally opened it, Grandma didn't look very good. She didn't look good at all. Her eyes were gone and her skin was all leathery and brown. Her lips were pulled back and it looked like she was grinning at me. I could tell that she was glad I dug her up, and I knew that if I took her back home, she'd start feeling better in no time. I decided to keep Grandma in my room so I could be with her all the time. That night we had a long talk and she told me a lot of stories. She told me all about what she'd been up to while she was away, and I told her how Dad had gotten really mean, and she said that she knew exactly what to do about Dad. We had to be quiet when I heard Dad come home. I heard him stumbling up the stairs like he usually did after he'd been out drinking. He made so much noise that he must have woken Mom up. A few minutes later, I heard Mom and Dad fighting, and this time it sounded worse than it had ever been. Just a little while after that, I heard Mom start screaming. I ran into their room and I saw Dad beating Mom with a belt. Then he started choking her. Before I could even do anything, Mom stopped moving and Dad started telling her to get up and stop pretending. He shook her and he shook her, just like I shook Grandma, but she still didn't get up. And then Dad noticed me standing in the doorway. "What do you want, you little pest?" he said. "Grandma's not going to like this," I replied. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "Well, Grandma was right about you. You never were any good, and you're only going to get worse. Grandma's in my room right now, and she knows what you've done." I don't think he believed me, but he had to see for himself. He pushed past me, grabbed me by the neck, and roughly pulled me along behind him as he stormed into my bedroom. That's when Dad got the shock of his life. Grandma was in there, sitting in the chair and grinning at him. "Oh my God!" Dad gasped. Grandma had already told me what to do about Dad. She even told me which drawer the meat cleaver was in. While Grandma kept Dad distracted, I was able to creep up behind him. After I chopped up Dad's body, Grandma smiled at me and told me what a smart kid I was. "Thanks, Grandma, but this was your idea. You're the smart one." After that, it was just Grandma and me. It was even better than it had been before. We had such a great time together, and there was no one around to bother us. We stayed up all night long, all the time, and talked, and Grandma told me ghost stories. Well, thank you for tuning in, everyone. That's it. Pure Horror, Volume 1. We hope you enjoyed these stories. We hope that you're somewhere safe, secure, and locked away from all the bad things that are out there. Take care of yourselves. Sweet dreams.